English version, during the darkest years of Finland's history, in the midst of the merciless fighting of the Second World War, a group of soldiers emerged whose actions would become a permanent part of Finnish military history. They were men from very different backgrounds. Among them were generals and colonels, but also ordinary privates. Men who commanded thousands of soldiers, and men who faced the enemy from only a few dozen meters away. One thing united them. They were appointed Knights of the Mannerheim Cross. The Mannerheim Cross was established in 1940 as part of the Order of the Cross of Liberty. It could be awarded regardless of military rank for exceptional bravery, exceptionally important achievements in combat, or exceptionally distinguished leadership of military operations. Between 1941 and 1945, only 191 soldiers were appointed Knights of the Mannerheim Cross, second class. But behind every number was a human being. Every one of them had a life before the war, a family, a home, and a future. Then came the war. Some led attacks deep into enemy territory. Others fought in forests, trenches, and among armored vehicles. Some survived the war. Others never returned home. In this documentary series, we will tell their stories, not simply when they received the Mannerheim Cross, but who these men really were, where they fought, what they did to earn one of the most prestigious military decorations in Finnish history, and what happened to them after the war. We'll begin with the first knight of the Mannerheim Cross and continue in numerical order all the way to the last. Knight number 191. This is their story. The Knights of the Mannerheim Cross. And the first chapter begins in July 1941. The Finnish army was once again at war, and the name of the man who would become the first Knight of the Mannerheim Cross was Ernst Ruben Lagos. Knight of the Mannerheim Cross, number 1, Ernst Ruben Lagos. When the first Mannerheim Cross was awarded in July 1941, its recipient was not an ordinary frontline soldier known for a single daring act. The first knight was an experienced professional soldier whose military career had begun long before the Winter War and the Continuation War. Man who would eventually become one of the best-known commanders associated with Finland's armored forces. Ernst Ruben Lagos was born on October 12, 1896, in Koski, in the province of Hemi, Finland. When Europe descended into the First World War, Finland was still part of the Russian Empire. The young Lagos joined the group of Finns who traveled to Germany to receive military training. Beginning in 1915, he served in the Royal Prussian Jaeger Battalion, 27. This was not merely training. Lagos also gained genuine combat experience on the Eastern Front of the First World War. He served in areas including the Miss River, the Gulf of Riga, and the Ah River. In 1917, he became a group leader and received further military instruction in Libau. In February 1918, Lagos returned to Finland with the main body of the Finnish Jaegers. Finland had declared its independence only a few months earlier, but the country had descended into civil war. Lagos fought in the ranks of the White Army and served in operations around Tampere, Kwakala, and Olila. When the war ended, his military career did not end with it. Quite the opposite. It was only beginning. During the following 2 decades, Lagos served in numerous training, command, and staff positions. He worked as a company commander, training officer, served in positions connected with reserve officer training, commanded a cadet company, and later served as chief of staff of the 2nd Division. In 1934, he qualified as a general staff officer. When the Soviet Union invaded Finland in November 1939 and the Winter War began, Lagos was once again at war. This time, however, his responsibility was very different from that of the young Jaeger who had fought 2 decades earlier. During the Winter War, Lagos served as head of the supply section of the Army of the Isthmus headquarters on the Karelian Isthmus. Logistics may not sound as dramatic as frontline combat, but a modern army quickly becomes incapable of fighting without ammunition, food, fuel, transportation, and replacements. Lagos therefore gained experience in sustaining a large military force while Finland fought for its survival against an overwhelmingly powerful enemy. The Winter War ended in March 1940. The peace did not last long. In the summer of 1941, Finland was once again at war with the Soviet Union. This time, Lagas would not remain behind the front in a logistical organization. He was given combat formations to command. During 1941, he first commanded the 1st Jaeger Brigade, and later the 5th Division. It was during this period that the name Ruben Lagas began to emerge in a way that would lead to a historic appointment. Mobility played an important role in the Finnish offensive. During the opening phase of the continuation, Lagas became associated with a style of command that emphasized rapid movement and the possibilities offered by Jaeger and armored formations. Units under his command were used at the spearhead of offensive operations. During the summer of 1941, Finnish forces advanced through Ladoga Karelia and toward Olonets. Lagas commanded troops in operations designed to break through Soviet defenses and continue the advance before the retreating enemy could establish another defensive line. His style of command was well suited to this form of warfare, speed, initiative, and constant pressure against the withdrawing enemy. Then, on July 22, 1941, something historic happened. Colonel Ernst Ruben Lagas was appointed a Knight of the Mannerheim Cross, 2nd class. His knight number was 1. He became the first man entered into the official list of the Knights of the Mannerheim Cross. At the time of his appointment, Lagas was serving as commander of the 5th Division. The Mannerheim Cross was intended to recognize exceptional bravery, extremely important achievements in combat, or exceptionally distinguished leadership of military operations. In Lagas's case, it was above all his leadership that was being recognized. But receiving the Mannerheim Cross was not the climax of his wartime story. The continuation war was only weeks. Old years of war still lay ahead. During 1941, Lagas also commanded a formation named after him, Detachment Lagas. As the Finnish offensive continued, his forces operated in the directions of the Svir River, Petrozavodsk, Medvezhegorsk, and Povinets. In the autumn of 1941, Petrozavodsk was captured as Finnish forces. Advanced into East Karelia, the mobile formations commanded by Lagas were among the prominent elements of this offensive. Contemporary Finnish military film. Footage even recorded Colonel Ruben Lagas in the Olonets region in September 1941, as Finnish armored and bicycle troops prepared to advance. But the nature of the war began to change. Rapid offensive phase was followed by a long period of positional warfare. In 1942, Finland created an armored division. Ruben Lagas was appointed its commander. This position permanently connected his name with the history of Finland's armored forces. The armored division combined tanks, Jaeger troops, and other mobile formations into a force that could be rapidly deployed wherever the situation at the front demanded it. Finland's armored equipment, however, was highly varied. Its forces operated, among other vehicles, captured Soviet tanks and later equipment acquired from Germany. Lagas commanded the division from 1942 until 1944. Then came the summer of 1944. The Soviet Union launched a massive offensive on the Karelian Isthmus. Finland's defenses came under extreme pressure. The armored division was committed to the fighting in an attempt to halt the offensive. The mobile force that had been developed under Lagas during the previous years now faced precisely the kind of crisis for which it had been trained. The Finnish army withdrew, established new defensive positions, and attempted to stop the Soviet advance. Lagas commanded his forces during the heavy battles on the Karelian Isthmus in the summer of 1944. But even the armistice with the Soviet Union did not bring his war to an end. Under the new political circumstances, Finland was required to remove German forces from its territory. The Lapland War began. Once again, Lagas commanded troops, this time Finnish soldiers, advanced north against their former German brothers in arms. His wartime route took him through Oulu and Rovaniemi and eventually toward Inari in the far north. It was an extraordinary conclusion to a military journey that had taken him from the Eastern Front of the First World War to the Finnish Civil War, the Winter War. the Continuation War, and finally the Lapland War. Lagos had already been promoted to Major General in October 1941. After the war, he continued serving in the Finnish Defense Forces. He commanded the 2nd Division until 1947, when he left active military service. Lagos then entered civilian life. From 1947 until his death, he served as managing director of Lojan Sato Oy in 1954. He also became a member of the first council of the foundation of the Knights of the Mannerheim Cross. Ernst Ruben Lagos died in Loja on July 15, 1959. He was 62 years old. He was buried at Hietaniemi Cemetery in Helsinki. Lagos is remembered especially as a commander associated with the development of Finland's armored forces and mobile warfare. But within the history of the Mannerheim Cross, his position can be described much more simply. When the long list of 191 knights began to take shape, one name was written on the very first line: Ernst Ruben Lagos, Knight of the Mannerheim Cross, number 1. Knight of the Mannerheim Cross, number 2. Paavo Juho Talvela. He became one of Finland's best-known and most forceful military commanders. His career stretched from the Eastern Front of the First World War through the Finnish Civil War, the Kinship Wars, and the Winter War to the major operations of the Continuation War. But above all, one place made Talvela's name a permanent part of Finnish military history: Tolvajärvi, Paavo Juho Toren. Later, Talvela was born on February 19, 1897, in the rural municipality of Helsinki. Finland was still part of the Russian Empire, and the idea of an independent Finnish army remained only a distant dream. During the First World War, the young Talvela joined the secret Finnish Jaeger movement. He traveled to Germany for military training and joined the Royal Prussian Jaeger Battalion 27. The Finns in Germany were not trained only on practice grounds. Talvela gained genuine experience of war on the Eastern Front, including in the areas around the Misi River and the Gulf of Riga. When Finland declared independence in December 1917 and soon descended into civil war, the Jaegers returned home. Talvela fought with the White Army and rapidly advanced into positions of responsibility. At only 21 years of age, he was already a major. For many young officers, the War of 1918 might have been the most dramatic period of their military lives. For Talvela, it was only the beginning. His attention turned toward East Karelia. He participated in the Kinship Wars and the Aunis expedition of 1919, in which Finnish volunteers attempted to support the Finno-Ugric population of East Karelia while expanding Finnish influence eastward. Talvela eventually became commander-in-chief of the expedition. The operation, however, failed to achieve its objectives. It became an important lesson for Talvela. While still very young, he had commanded troops in real warfare and had seen how ambitious military plans could fail. During the 1920s, Talvela continued his military education. He studied artillery, received training in England, and attended the Finnish War College. In 1927, he qualified as a general staff officer, and the following year he was promoted to colonel. Talvela did not spend the entire interwar period in the army. He also entered civilian life and worked in positions connected with Suomi Filmi, the state alcohol monopoly, and Finland's forest industry. Then came November 1939. The Soviet Union invaded Finland. The Winter War began. North of Lake Ladoga, the situation rapidly became dangerous. Soviet forces advanced toward Tolvajärvi, while Finnish troops withdrew before them. The Finnish High Command feared that continued enemy progress could open a route deep behind Finland's defensive positions. The advance had to be stopped. On December 5, 1939, Group Talvela was formed. Paavo Talvela was appointed its commander. His mission looked simple only on paper. The Red Army had to be stopped. Talvela arrived at a front where Finnish troops were, exhausted after repeated withdrawals, and where the enemy possessed considerable numerical superiority. But Talvela had no intention of simply waiting for the next Soviet attack. He wanted to regain the initiative. One of his most important subordinate commanders was Lieutenant Colonel Aro Pajari. Talvela and Pajari decided to answer an offensive with an offensive of their own. The terrain around Tolvajärvi favored the Finns. Forests, lakes, ridges, and narrow roads forced large Soviet formations to move along restricted routes. Finnish troops knew the terrain and could operate in the forests with greater flexibility. During the first half of December, the Finns launched several counterattacks. The fighting was confused and brutal. Men fought exhausted in freezing conditions, while both sides searched for weaknesses in the other's positions. On December 12, 1939, the decisive phase of the Battle of Tolvajärvi took place. The Finns attacked. Gradually, Soviet forces were forced to withdraw. Finland had achieved one of its first significant offensive victories of the Winter War. The importance of the victory extended far beyond Tolvajärvi. The war had been raging for less than 2 weeks. The Red Army possessed overwhelming superiority in manpower, artillery, tanks, and aircraft. On several fronts, Finnish forces had been retreating. At Tolvajärvi, the opposite happened. The Finns attacked, and the enemy retreated. The battle sent an important message through the Finnish army. The Red Army was not invincible. Talvela's forces continued advancing from Tolvajärvi toward Eglajärvi and the Aitojoki River. Soviet troops were pushed farther east, and the situation on the front stabilized. Talvela's reputation rose rapidly. On December 18, 1939, only 6 days after the decisive fighting at Tolvajärvi, he was promoted to Major General. He was 42 years old. In February 1940, Talvela was given an even greater responsibility when he was appointed commander of 3 Corps on the Karelian Isthmus. The Winter War ended on March 13, 1940. Finland remained independent, but was forced to surrender large territories to the Soviet Union. The peace, however, remained uncertain. Finland feared another Soviet attack while the European war expanded rapidly. In the autumn of 1940, Mannerheim sent Talvela to Germany on a special mission. Talvela was instructed to investigate Germany's attitude toward Finland and the possibilities for military cooperation. The assignment demonstrated that Mannerheim trusted him beyond the battlefield as well. In the summer of 1941, war returned. Germany invaded the Soviet Union, and Finland soon entered the conflict. The continuation war had begun. Talvela received command of 6 Corps. The situation was completely different from December 1939. This time, the Finns were not retreating. They were attacking. In Ladoga, Karelia, Finnish forces attempted to break Soviet defenses and advance rapidly toward the territories lost after the Winter War and eventually beyond the old frontier. Talvela's 6 Corps became one of the central formations in the offensive. When the attack began in July 1941, his forces broke through Soviet positions and advanced rapidly. Talvela's command style was aggressive. He believed in initiative, rapid action, and denying the enemy unnecessary time to reorganize its defenses. This made him effective in mobile warfare, although his forceful personality could also create conflicts with other officers. On August 3, 1941, Talvela was appointed a Knight of the Mannerheim Cross. His knight number was 2. The justification for his appointment emphasized his personal bravery in numerous hard battles and the major military achievements produced by his skillful leadership. The Mannerheim Cross, therefore, did not recognize one isolated heroic act. It was primarily recognition of a commander. The crisis at Tolvajärvi had demonstrated his ability to turn a defensive emergency into a counterattack. The battles of the summer of 1941 demonstrated his ability to lead major formations on the offensive. But Talvela's responsibilities were not limited to the battlefield. He became an important link between the Finnish and German military leaderships. Talvela served as Mannerheim's representative in contact with the German High Command and met senior German military leaders. The assignment was difficult. Finland and Germany fought the same enemy, but their ultimate political and military objectives were not identical. Talvela had to communicate Mannerheim's positions, while following Germany's plans in a war whose scale was far greater than anything occurring on Finland's own front. In 1942, Talvela was promoted to lieutenant general. In the summer of 1944, his career took another dramatic turn. The Soviet Union launched a major strategic offensive against Finland. Talvela commanded the Honest Group in East Karelia. 3 years earlier, Finnish troops had advanced rapidly eastward. Now they were moving in the opposite direction. Talvela had to supervise the withdrawal while preserving the fighting ability of his troops. The objective was to prevent the Red Army from turning a controlled retreat into the destruction of Finnish formations. In the autumn of 1944, the war between Finland and the Soviet Union ended with an armistice. Talvela's long war was over. He later returned to business and held several senior positions in Finland and abroad. Yet his connection with his military career and with Mannerheim remained. When Marshal Mannerheim was buried in Helsinki in February 1951, Paavo Talvela was one of the Knights of the Mannerheim Cross who lowered his coffin into the grave. In 1954, Talvela participated in founding the foundation of the Knights of the Mannerheim Cross and later served as chairman of its board. In 1966, he was granted the rank of General of the Infantry. Paavo Juho Talvela died in Helsinki on September 30, 1973. He was 76 years old. His life had passed through almost the entire early military history of independent Finland. From a Jaeger of the First World War to an officer in the War of 1918. From a commander in the Kinship Wars to a general of the Winter War. From Tolvajärvi to the major offensives of the Continuation War, and eventually to a position linking the highest military leaderships of Finland and Germany. Talvela was a forceful and sometimes controversial personality. But the most famous moment of his military career came in December 1939. The Finnish army had been retreating. The Red Army was advancing at Tolvajärvi. The situation looked dangerous. Then, Paavo Talvela arrived. He did not ask how much farther the Finns should retreat. He began planning an attack. A few days later, the Red Army was retreating. Paavo Juho Talvela, Knight of the Mannerheim Cross No. 2. Knight of the Mannerheim Cross. No. 3, Erkki Johannes Rapana. In Finnish military history, his name is associated above all with forests, wilderness, and battles fought in areas where roads were scarce and the ability to operate in difficult terrain could decide an entire operation. Rapana later became known as the Wilderness General. It was an appropriate description for a man who spent much of his military career in the border regions of North Karelia and who commanded Finnish troops during two particularly well-known phases of the war. At Rukkajärvi in 1941 and at Ilomantsi in 1944, Erkki Johannes Rapana was born in Oulujoki on June 2, 1893. During the First World War, he joined other Finnish volunteers in the Jaeger movement and traveled to Germany. From 1916 until 1918, Rapana served in the Royal Prussian Jaeger Battalion 27. He received military training in Germany and also participated in fighting on the Eastern Front of the First World War in the areas of the Misse River, the Gulf of Riga, and the Aa River. In 1917, he also attended the B course of the military school in Libau. After Finland had declared independence and the country descended into civil war, the Jaegers returned home. Rapana arrived in Vasa with the main body of the Finnish Jaegers on February 25, 1918. He served with the White Army in the Karelian Mounted Jaeger Regiment and took part in the fighting on the Karelian Isthmus during the War of 1918. After the war, Rapana continued his military career. He served in cavalry units, the Civil Guard organization, and military training positions. In 1921, his career took a direction that would later prove extremely important. Rapana entered the Finnish Border Guard. He became commander of the Joensuu Border Guard District and remained in the position through most of the interwar period. The forests, lakes, roads, and border conditions of North Karelia became thoroughly familiar to him. Rapana was also an active hunter and outdoorsman. When the Winter War began on November 30th, 1939, this knowledge of the region became a military advantage. Rapana was promoted to colonel on December 27, 1939. During the Winter War, he commanded the North Karelia Group. His area of responsibility included the directions of Pielisjärvi, Lieksa, and Kumo. This was an enormous and sparsely developed sector of the front. Soviet forces attempted to use the limited road network to advance deeper into Finland. The Finns suffered from a shortage of troops. Rapana's forces had to defend long distances while preventing the enemy from exploiting the roads. During the Winter War, Rapana employed methods that became characteristic of Finnish wilderness warfare. The enemy was not always stopped directly at a prepared defensive position. Instead, Soviet formations could be allowed to advance deeper into difficult terrain before Finnish forces attacked their supply routes, flanks, and rear areas. In the Lieksa sector, the Soviet advance was stopped, and enemy troops withdrew back across the border before the end of 1939. During the Winter War, Rapana gained valuable experience in precisely the type of warfare for which he later became famous. Long distances, sparse roads, forests, severe weather, and the independent use of smaller formations. The Winter War ended in March 1940. The following year, war between Finland and the Soviet Union began again. For the continuation war, the Finnish army formed the 14th Division. Colonel Erkki Rapana was appointed its commander. The division occupied an unusual position. It was directly subordinate to Finnish headquarters and Commander-in-Chief Mannerheim, rather than being part of the Army of Karelia. The 14th Division operated in the Lieksa-Rukajärvi direction. Its sector was vast, sparsely populated, and largely wilderness. The division received its offensive orders on June 25, 1941. The advance began in early July. One of the first objectives was Rapola. After its capture, Rapana's troops continued eastward. During July 1941, fighting around Omilia resulted in Finnish forces successfully surrounding substantial Soviet formations. These operations in difficult forest terrain represented exactly the kind of warfare for which Rapana's men had been prepared. The 14th Division continued its advance from Rapola through Omilia toward Ontrosenvaara and Rukajärvi. The performance of Rapana's forces attracted the attention of the commander-in-chief. On August 3, 1941, Colonel Erkki Johannes Rapana was appointed a Knight of the Mannerheim Cross. His knight number was 3. The official justification stated that he received the Mannerheim Cross for personal bravery and for military operations conducted under extremely difficult conditions that produced major results. In Rapana's case, those difficult conditions had a very literal meaning. His division did not operate in an area of extensive highways, major cities, or densely constructed defensive systems. Its battlefield was wilderness. Supplies had to move over long distances. Units had to be capable of independent action, and the commander had to understand the importance of terrain. The award did not end the advance of the 14th Division. During August, Rapana's troops continued toward Rukajärvi. On September 11, 1941, the 14th Division captured the village of Rukajärvi. The advance then continued toward the Ontajoki River. By order of the commander-in-chief, the offensive was halted in September 1941. The 14th Division remained in the Rukajärvi region. It became one of the most unusual sectors of the continuation war. A long period of positional warfare began. The front was far from Finland's major population centers. Field outposts could be separated by considerable distances. Patrols, reconnaissance, and operations behind enemy lines became regular features of the fighting. Rapana commanded the 14th Division throughout this period. On December 31, 1941, he was promoted to Major General. The Rukajärvi front remained under Finnish control until the withdrawal of 1944. During the summer of 1944, Finland's military situation changed dramatically. In June, the Soviet Union launched a massive offensive on the Karelian Isthmus. Soviet forces also began offensive operations in East Karelia. By late July, the situation around Ilomantsi had become dangerous. The Soviet 176th and 289th Divisions advanced into Finnish territory and threatened the flank of Finnish forces. Finnish headquarters needed a commander who knew the region and understood warfare in difficult forest terrain. The choice was Rapana. A temporary formation known as Group Rapana was assembled under his command. It consisted of several different units brought together rapidly for the fighting around Ilomantsi. Rapana already knew the region from his years of peacetime service with the border guard. Now the local knowledge accumulated over many years became important. The Battle of Ilomantsi began in late July 1944. A central element of Rapana's plan was to strike the communications of the Soviet divisions and separate the enemy formations from one another. Finnish troops moved through forest terrain and cut the roads that Soviet forces depended upon for movement and supplies. The fighting developed into a series of encirclements, known in Finland as Matti battles. The situation was not simple. Soviet forces received reinforcements, and some of the surrounded troops managed to break out. The two Soviet divisions were not completely destroyed, but their offensive was stopped. Soviet forces were pushed back, while the Finns captured substantial quantities of military equipment. The Battle of Ilomantsi is regarded as the final major Finnish defensive victory of the Continuation War. Its importance was especially significant because it was fought at a time when Finland was already seeking a way out of the war. Rapana's performance received unusual recognition. On August 13, 1944, a proposal was submitted that he should receive the Mannerheim Cross for a second time for his successful leadership during the fighting at Ilomantsi. The proposal was not approved. Only 4 knights ultimately received the Mannerheim Cross twice. Rapana was not among them. In September 1944, Finland signed an armistice with the Soviet Union. Rapana nevertheless continued his career in the Finnish military and border guard. He served as acting head of the border guard from 1944 to 1945 and as its head from 1945 until 1947. The post-war years were difficult for him. In 1947, Rapana was detained in connection with the weapons cache case and remained in detention for 8 months. He later returned to military duties. In 1949, he was appointed commander of the Perepogjola military district, but he was released from the position in the public interest on May 5, 1949. Outside his military career, Rapana was known as an enthusiastic hunter, dog enthusiast, and outdoorsman. He later became one of the founders of the Finnish Kennel Club and served as its chairman from 1953 until 1956. He was also a member of the Council of the Foundation of the Knights of the Mannerheim Cross from 1954 until his death. Erkki Johannes Rapana died in Joensuu on September 14, 1962. He was 69 years old. He was buried in Joensuu. Rapana's long military career contained many different phases. A Jaeger on the Eastern Front of the First World War, a cavalry officer during the War of 1918, a border guard commander in North Karelia, a winter war commander in the Lieksa and Kumo sectors, commander of the 14th Division at Rukajärvi, and finally, in the summer of 1944, the man entrusted with a dangerous situation at Ilomantsi. Rapana's military career was built upon exceptional experience in wilderness and forest conditions. When large armies depended upon roads, logistics, and heavy equipment, Rapana understood how the forest itself could become part of the battlefield. In 1941, that knowledge helped carry his troops to Rukajärvi. 3 years later, the same experience helped stop the Soviet advance at Ilomantsi. Erkki, Knight of the Mannerheim Cross No. 4, Vilho Reto. The first 3 Knights of the Mannerheim Cross had been experienced officers and commanders of military formations. With the fourth night, everything changed. Vilho Räty was not a general. He was not a colonel. He did not command a division or an army corps. When he received the Mannerheim Cross on August 3, 1941, he was a private, an ordinary anti-tank gunner, and that was precisely why his appointment was. Historic Vilho Räty became the first enlisted soldier to receive the Mannerheim Cross. His night number was 4. Vilho Räty was born on March 10, 1913. In Karelian on the Karelian Isthmus. He attended elementary school and completed his compulsory military service in 1935. Räty was not a professional soldier. As Europe moved toward another major war, his life was similar to that of countless other Finnish men. Then, on November 30, 1939, the Soviet Union invaded Finland. The Winter War began. Räty was called into service and fought as a rifleman in the sector around Lake Ladoga, Metsapirtti, and the Karelian Isthmus. His wartime service included the battles at Taipale. Taipale became one of the best-known and bloodiest defensive sectors of the Winter War. Soviet forces repeatedly attempted to break through the Finnish positions, but the defenses held until the end of the war. Räty survived the winter war. The Moscow Peace Treaty was signed on March 13, 1940. He was released from service on May 25, 1940. The peace did not last long. In the summer of 1941, war between Finland and the Soviet Union began. Again, Räty was assigned to Infantry Regiment 27. His role was now different from the one he had held during the Winter War. He became an anti-tank gunner in the regiment's 14th Company. The work of anti-tank soldiers was dangerous. Soviet tanks were among the Red Army's most important offensive weapons, and the anti-tank crew often had to allow an enemy tank to approach, aim accurately, and achieve a disabling hit before the tank could destroy their position. During the summer of 1941, Finnish forces advanced on the Karelian Isthmus toward territories that had been lost after the Winter War. Then came the day that changed Vilho Räty's life, August 3, 1941. During the fighting, Räty acted in a way that resulted in his immediate recognition. According to the official citation issued by the Finnish commander-in-chief, Private Vilho, Räty rapidly captured an enemy anti-tank gun. But the situation was only beginning. The captured weapon was not in normal operating condition. Its aiming equipment was missing. For an anti-tank gun, this was a serious problem. Normally, a gunner relied on sighting and aiming equipment to place the weapon accurately on an enemy tank. Räty did not have that option. He solved the problem differently. He aimed through the barrel of the gun. Then he opened fire with the captured Soviet weapon against Soviet tanks. The result was 4 destroyed enemy tanks. This was not a legend created years after the war. The action itself was recorded in the official justification for his Mannerheim Cross. The commander-in-chief specifically recognized Räty's bravery, rapid action, and exceptional resourcefulness during the battle. On that same day, August 3, 1941, Private Vilho Räty was appointed a Knight of the Mannerheim Cross, second-class Knight number 4. His appointment carried significance beyond the individual action. The Mannerheim Cross had been created as a decoration that could be awarded regardless of military rank. Räty demonstrated that principle in practice. The first 3 knights had been senior officers in command positions. The 4th was a private. A soldier did not need to be a high-ranking commander to receive the Mannerheim Cross. The decisive factor could be the actions of an individual soldier on the battlefield. Räty's war did not end with the award. Only 23 days later, on August 26, 1941, he was promoted to corporal. He continued serving in anti-tank duties and acted as the leader of an anti-tank gun group during 1941 and 1942. But the war was long. In 1942, Räty was released from service because of illness. He remained away from frontline service during 1942 and 1943 before later returning. In 1943, he once again served in anti-tank duties with Infantry Regiment 27. Later, he served as a squad leader in Cavalry Regiment 3. His continuation war service took him through areas including Vuoksenlaakso, Mietilä, Lankila, Karjalainen, Rätykylä, Ylikuunu, Kirvu, Antrea, Hopeasalmi, Kaukila, Mälkölä, Salmenkaita, Muolaa, Upuneenkangas, Suurkaljala, Aleksandrovka, and Valkeasaari. During the summer of 1944, the situation on the Karelian Isthmus changed dramatically once again. On June 9th, the Soviet Union began its major offensive. Finnish troops were forced to withdraw from positions they had occupied for years. Reto was once again serving on the Karelian Isthmus. His service included locations directly connected with the heavy fighting of the summer of 1944, including Valkeasaari. The war was now completely different from the offensive phase of 1941. 3 years earlier, Finnish troops had advanced eastward. Now they had to stop an overwhelmingly powerful offensive while withdrawing toward new defensive positions. The armistice between Finland and the Soviet Union came into effect in September 1944. Reto continued in service afterward. On November 1st, 1944, he was promoted to sergeant. Finally, he was demobilized on November 19, 1944. His war was over. Vilho Reto returned to civilian life. Like many Finnish soldiers, he had to rebuild his life after the war. His birthplace, Kaneljärvi, was situated on the Karelian Isthmus in territory Finland, had been forced to cede to the Soviet Union. After the war, Reto worked as a farmer and horticultural entrepreneur in Korvenkylä, Anjalankoski, from 1945 until 1956. He then entered an entirely different profession. From 1956 until 1966, he worked as a taxi driver in Anjala. In 1966, his working life changed again. Reto became a production worker at Neste's Sköldvik refinery and remained there until 1975. Reto also participated in veterans and reservists organizations. He was a member of the Inkeroisten Region Reserve NCO organization and the Anjala War Veterans. In 1991, the Kymenlaakso War Veterans District named him an honorary veteran. His connection with the Knights of the Mannerheim Cross continued long after the war. In 1954, Reto was one of the signatories of the founding Charter of the Foundation of the Knights of the Mannerheim Cross. It was a significant symbolic role for the man who had been the first enlisted knight of the Mannerheim Cross. His military rank also continued to rise in the reserve. Reto had been promoted to corporal in 1941 and sergeant in 1944. On November 20th, 1968, he was promoted to staff sergeant. Yet the military rank most strongly associated with him in history remained private, because it was Private Vilho Reto who performed the action that earned the Mannerheim Cross. Vilho Reto died in Anjalankoski on January 24, 2002. He was 88 years old. He was buried in Anjala. Reto's story differs fundamentally from those of the first Knights of the Mannerheim Cross. Ruben Lagus was a colonel and later a major general. Paavo Talvela was a general and commander of major formations. Erkki Rapana commanded a division. But Vilho Reto was a private. He did not create strategic plans at Finnish headquarters. He did not command thousands of soldiers. His Mannerheim Cross was decided in a single battle by the rapid decisions of one soldier. On August 3, 1941, enemy tanks were on the battlefield. Reto captured an enemy anti-tank gun. The weapon lacked its aiming equipment. He aimed through the barrel and destroyed 4 enemy tanks. His name was then entered into the list of the Knights of the Mannerheim Cross. The first ordinary enlisted soldier to receive the decoration. Vilho Reto, Knight of the Mannerheim Cross number 4. Knight of the Mannerheim Cross number 5. Antero Johannes Svensson. His name is not as widely remembered today as those of many other Knights of the Mannerheim Cross. Yet his military career passed through almost the entire early military history of independent Finland. From the Jaeger movement of the First World War to the War of 1918, from the fighting at Kola during the Winter War to the offensive phase of the Continuation War, from the capture of Sortavala to the Svir River, and finally to the heavy battles around Viborg Bay in the summer of 1944. Antero Johannes Svensson was born in Raisio on November 30th, 1892. His parents were Johan Alfred Svensson, owner of the Hintsa estate, and Alma Sofia Granström. Svensson attended school in Turku and later continued his studies at the University of Helsinki. The First World War, however, changed the direction of his life. Finland was still part of the Russian Empire, and a group of young Finnish men began traveling to Germany to receive military training for a possible future struggle for independence. Svensson joined the Jaeger movement. He left for Germany in November 1915 and joined the Royal Prussian Jaeger Battalion 27. In addition to military training, Svensson gained real combat experience on the Eastern Front of the First World War. He participated in fighting in the areas of the Misa River, the Gulf of Riga, and the Aa River. When Finland declared independence in December 1917 and soon afterward descended into civil war, the Finnish Jaegers returned home. Svensson arrived in Finland on February 25, 1918. He served with the cavalry of the White Army, first as a platoon commander and later as a squadron commander. He participated in battles including Lenkipoja, Kumalati, Laitikala, Pelkäni, and Vesilahti. After the War of 1918, Svensson remained in the Finnish Defense Forces. His career was not based solely upon combat experience. He also received extensive professional military education. During the early 1920s, Svensson studied at the cavalry school in Saumur, France. He later attended the general course of the Finnish War College from 1924 until 1926. After graduating, he also taught military history and strategy. Svensson gained considerable international experience as well. From 1930 until 1933, he served as Finland's military attaché to Poland, Czechoslovakia, and Romania. After returning to Finland, he worked at the General Staff and later returned to Troop Command. In 1937, Svensson became commander of the Karelian Guards Regiment. When the Soviet Union invaded Finland on November 30, 1939, Svensson was already a colonel and an experienced professional officer. At the beginning of the Winter War, he commanded the 2nd Brigade. The brigade took part in fighting on the Karelian Isthmus. In January 1940, however, Svensson received a new assignment. He was appointed commander of the 12th Division. The division fought north of Lake Ladoga on the Kola front. Kola became one of the best-known Finnish defensive sectors of the Winter War. Finnish troops held their positions despite repeated Red Army attacks until the end of the war. Svensson commanded the 12th Division during the final months of the conflict on this front. The Winter War ended with the Moscow Peace Treaty on March 13, 1940. During the interim peace, Svensson was appointed commander of the Savo-Karelia Military District. He remained in that position until war between Finland and the Soviet Union began again in the summer of 1941. For the Continuation War, Svensson received command of the 7th Division. The division consisted largely of troops from the Savo region and was also known as the Kalpa Division. During the summer of 1941, the Finnish army began advancing toward the territories lost after the Winter War. Svensson's 7th Division operated in Ladoga, Karelia. One of its most important objectives was Sortavala. Sortavala was a significant town on the northern shore of Lake Ladoga. It had been ceded to the Soviet Union after the Winter War. In August 1941, Finnish forces approached Sortavala while the Soviet 168th Rifle Division operating in the region found itself in an increasingly difficult position. A new Finnish I Corps was formed in August and was tasked with containing and defeating Soviet forces around Sortavala. Svensson's 7th Division played a central role in the operation. Sortavala was captured on August 15, 1941. The Finnish forces. did not succeed in destroying all of the Soviet 168th Division, and part of the formation escaped across Lake Ladoga. Nevertheless, the capture of Sortavala represented an important military and symbolic achievement for Finland. The following day, August 16, 1941, Commander-in-Chief Mannerheim appointed Colonel Antero Johannes Svensson a Knight of the Mannerheim Cross. His knight number was 5. The official justification specifically connected the award to skillfully led military operations that had resulted in the liberation of Sortavala. It was therefore primarily recognition of a commander. Svensson did not receive the Mannerheim Cross for a single personal act of bravery. He received it for the way in which the division under his command had carried out an important military operation. The capture of Sortavala did not end the advance of the 7th Division. The division continued eastward into East Karelia. During the autumn of 1941, Finnish forces advanced toward the Svir River, which connects Lake Ladoga and Lake Onega. By October, Svensson's division had reached the Svir sector near Lake Onega. The rapid offensive phase gradually came to an end. From December 1941 into the spring of 1942, Soviet forces launched several attacks in the Svir region. The Finns defended the positions they had reached. Afterward, the front settled into a long period of positional warfare. Svensson remained commander of the 7th Division until 1943. On December 18, 1941, he was promoted to Major General. In 1943, Svensson received an even greater responsibility. He was appointed commander of V Corps. The Corps operated in the Svir sector of the Karelian Isthmus. By this stage, the war was very different from the summer of 1941. Instead of major advances, the front remained largely stationary. Troops built defensive positions, carried out patrols, and prepared for the possibility of another major Soviet offensive. That offensive eventually came. In June 1944, the Soviet Union launched major offensives against the Finnish fronts. On the Karelian Isthmus, Finnish forces were quickly forced to retreat. At the same time, the front in East Karelia also began to move. Svensson's V Corps was transferred from the Karelian sector to the Karelian Isthmus. On June 18, 1944, the Corps became responsible for the area behind the city of Vyborg, as well as the army sector of Vyborg Bay. The situation was extremely difficult. Vyborg fell to Soviet forces on June 20th. The Red Army then attempted to continue its advance through the Vyborg Bay region. Soviet forces sought to capture islands in the bay and establish a bridgehead on its northwestern shore. Svensson's 5 Corps, together with other Finnish formations and German units sent to the area, participated in stopping the offensive. The battles of Vyborg Bay formed part of the wider defensive struggle of the summer of 1944, during which the Finnish army attempted to prevent a Soviet breakthrough deeper into the country. Soviet forces succeeded in capturing several islands, but their attempt to continue across the bay and farther into Finland was stopped. Svensson commanded the Corps during this critical phase. After the summer of 1944, Finland's military and political situation changed rapidly. An armistice with the Soviet Union came into effect in September. Svensson's period as commander of major frontline formations was drawing to an end. After the continuation war, he was given command of the Light Brigade. He remained in the Finnish Defense Forces after the war. Antero Svensson's life, however, ended unexpectedly. On April 26, 1946, he was at Hotel Torni in Helsinki. At the time, the building was being used by the Allied Control Commission that had arrived in Finland after the war. Svensson suffered a heart attack in the hotel and died. He was only 53 years old. He was buried at Avenisto Cemetery in Hämeenlinna. Antero Svensson had experienced an exceptionally long and varied military career. A Jaeger on the Eastern Front of the First World War, a cavalry officer in the War of 1918, a military attaché in Central and Eastern Europe, a divisional commander at Kola during the Winter War, commander of the 7th Division during the offensive phase of the Continuation War, commander of V Corps on the Svir and at Vyborg Bay. but his Mannerheim Cross was connected above all with one place, Sortavala. On August 15, 1941, Finnish forces captured the town. The following day, Mannerheim rewarded the divisional commander responsible for the operation, Colonel Antero Johannes Svensson. Knight of the Mannerheim Cross number 5. Knight of the Mannerheim Cross number 6. Oiva Emil Kalervo Tuominen. Until this point, the knights in our series had fought on the ground. They had commanded divisions, fought tanks, and taken part in battles through forests, roads, and towns. Oiva Tuominen fought much of his war somewhere entirely different. In the air. He became the first member of the Finnish Air Force to be appointed a Knight of the Mannerheim Cross, and his achievements came during a period when Finnish fighter pilots frequently faced an enemy with overwhelming numerical superiority. Oiva Emil Kalervo Tuominen was born in Iiti on March 5, 1908. He attended elementary school and began his military career in the Finnish Air Force during the 1920s. Tuominen completed his compulsory military service with the Aviation School and Land Flying Squadron during 1926 and 1927. At first, his career was connected with aircraft technology. He completed a reserve mechanic course in 1927 and another mechanic course in 1930, but his future would not be limited to maintaining aircraft. Tuominen wanted to fly. During 1933 and 1934, he completed the Finnish Air Force's non-commissioned officer pilot course. He then continued his training with an instrument flying course in 1934, a parachute course in 1935, and an infantry course during 1936 and 1937. Tuominen developed into a professional serviceman with extensive knowledge of both aircraft technology and flying. During the 1930s, he served as an aircraft mechanic and NCO pilot with Flying Squadron 5. In 1938, he transferred to Flying Squadron 26 and in 1939 to Flying Squadron 24. Then the Winter War began. On November 30, 1939, the Soviet Union invaded Finland. The Red Army entered the war supported by the enormous Soviet Air Force. Finland possessed far fewer fighter aircraft. During the Winter War, Tuominen served as an NCO pilot first with Flying Squadron 24 and later with Flying Squadron 26. He flew over the Karelian Isthmus and Ladoga, Karelia. During the Winter War, Tuominen achieved 8 aerial victories. This was a highly significant result for a Finnish fighter pilot during a war lasting only slightly more than 3 months. Air combat was not simply a question of who possessed the fastest aircraft. A pilot had to detect the enemy in time, predict its movement, control his own aircraft at its limits, and reach firing position. A single mistake could mean death. The Winter War ended on March 13, 1940. Tuominen remained in the Finnish Air Force. On April 25, 1940, he was promoted to warrant officer. During the interim peace, the Finnish Air Force prepared for the possibility of another war. That war began in the summer of 1941. At the beginning of the Continuation War, Tuominen served with Flying Squadron 26. The squadron operated, among other aircraft, the Italian Fiat G50 fighter. The Fiat was not the most modern fighter of the war, but Finnish pilots achieved considerable success with it. Tuominen was one of them. During the summer of 1941, Finnish ground forces advanced eastward. At the same time, the Air Force had to protect Finnish troops, counter Soviet aircraft, and prevent enemy bombing and reconnaissance operations. Tuominen's number of aerial victories began to rise rapidly. On July 23, 1941, he was promoted to Flight Master. Only a few weeks later, his name became part of the history of the Mannerheim Cross. On August 18, 1941, the Commander-in-Chief appointed Oiva Emil Kalervo Tuominen a Knight of the Mannerheim Cross, 2nd class. His knight number was 6. The official citation stated that, as an exceptionally successful fighter pilot, Tuominen had by that time shot down 18 enemy aircraft. The number was remarkable. He had achieved 8 victories during the Winter War, During the opening months of the continuation war, his total had already increased to 18. Tuominen therefore became the first member of the Finnish Air Force to receive the Mannerheim Cross. But his record did not stop at 18. Tuominen continued serving with Flying Squadron 26 from 1941 until 1943. He flew combat missions over East Karelia, the Karelian Isthmus, and the Gulf of Finland. As the war continued, both aircraft technology and the nature of aerial combat changed. The Soviet Air Force received increasingly modern fighters. Finland also needed better equipment. In 1943, Finland began receiving Messerschmitt Bf-109 fighters from Germany. Tuominen was sent to Germany that same year in connection with the acquisition of the Messerschmitt aircraft. This represented an important change for Finland's fighter force. The Bf-109 was considerably more capable than many of the aircraft previously available to Finnish pilots. In 1943, Tuominen transferred to Flying Squadron 34, which operated the Messerschmitt fighter. The unit was later renamed Fighter Squadron 34. Flying the Messerschmitt, Tuominen continued to fight against the Soviet Air Force. During the summer of 1944, the Finnish Air Force faced one of the most difficult situations in its history. On June 9, the Soviet Union began its major offensive on the Karelian Isthmus. The Red Army offensive was supported by extremely powerful air operations. Finnish fighter pilots had to protect ground forces, intercept bomber formations, and fight Soviet fighters. Tuominen participated in these battles as well. By this stage, he was already one of Finland's most experienced fighter pilots. His final wartime total reached 44 aerial victories. 8 of those victories had been achieved during the Winter War. This made him one of the most successful Finnish fighter pilots of the Second World War. Tuominen's achievement is also remarkable, because it was built using several different fighter types and during very different phases of the war. The short and intense defensive fighting of the Winter War, the offensive phase of the Continuation War in 1941, the long period of positional warfare, and finally the summer of 1944, when the Soviet Air Force had become much stronger both numerically and technically. Tuominen's military career ended soon after the war. He served with Fighter Squadron 34 during 1944 and 1945 and left active service on January 6, 1945. He was 36 years old. After the war, Tuominen returned to civilian life. He worked as a foreman at Wärtsilä's Helsinki shipyard. Flying, however, did not disappear completely from his life. He also worked as a pilot for several employers, including Imatran Voima. Later, Tuominen worked as a taxi driver in Helsinki. The post-war life of one of Finland's most successful wartime fighter pilots thus became remarkably ordinary. His connection with the Knights of the Mannerheim Cross nevertheless remained. Tuominen served as a deputy member of the Council of the Foundation of the Knights of the Mannerheim Cross from 1960 until his death. Oiva Emil Kalervo Tuominen died in Numela on January 28, 1976. He was 67 years old. He was buried at Malmi Cemetery in Helsinki. Tuominen's story was very different from those of the knights who came before him. He did not command a division like Rapana or Svensson. He did not command an army corps like Talvela. And his Mannerheim Cross was not based upon one single battlefield action like Vilho Reto's. Tuominen's achievement was built one air battle at a time. 8 victories during the Winter War, 18 by August 1941, and a final wartime total of 44. His mission was simple to describe, but extraordinarily difficult to carry out. Take off, find the enemy, fight, and return. By August 18, 1941, his achievements had already become significant enough to make him the first member of the Finnish Air Force among the Knights of the Mannerheim Cross. Flightmaster Oiva Emil Kalervo, Tuominen, 44 aerial victories. Knight of the Mannerheim Cross number 6. Knight of the Mannerheim Cross number 7, Juho Pösi. His story differs from those of many of the first knights. Pösi was not a professional general or commander of a major formation. He was a reserve officer with a border guard background and a company commander who led his men directly from the front line, and it was there that he performed the actions for which he was decorated. Juho Posi was born in Salmi on January 15, 1898. He attended elementary school and belonged to the Salmi Civil Guard from 1918 until 1922. During the War of 1918, he served with the Civil Guard in various duties in the Salmi region. In 1919, Posi began serving with the Salmi Border Guard. He initially served as a border guard soldier. From 1922 until 1939, he worked as a border guard non-commissioned officer and company sergeant major. He completed an infantry course during 1923 and 1924 and a reserve officer course in 1927. His long service on Finland's eastern frontier gave him experience of terrain, military discipline, and troop leadership before the major wars began. When the Winter War started on November 30, 1939, Posi was appointed a company commander in Separate Battalion 10. Later, he also commanded a separate guerrilla company. His Winter War service took him through several hard-fought sectors in Ladoga, Karelia. Posi fought at locations including Tolvajärvi, Eglajärvi, Aitojoki, and Kola. The Battle of Tolvajärvi in December 1939 was especially important for Finland. Finnish forces had been retreating before the Red Army advance, but formations commanded by Paavo Talvela and Aro Pajari launched a counterattack. Posi served among these troops. After Tolvajärvi, the Finns continued attacking toward Eglajärvi and Aitojoki. During the Winter War, Posi gained extensive experience of offensive fighting, forest warfare, and commanding a company in difficult conditions. On December 15, 1939, he was promoted to reserve lieutenant. On March 13, 1940, the final day of the Winter War, Posi was wounded at Kola. The war between Finland and the Soviet Union ended that same day. After the Winter War, Posi was already proposed for the Mannerheim Cross on the basis of his wartime achievements. The proposal was made by Major General Paavo Talvela. However, the post-Winter War proposals were not ultimately carried through, and their consideration was interrupted when the Continuation War began. During the interim peace, Posi remained in military service. In 1940, he served as a company commander in Infantry Regiment 42, later as a quartermaster in Cavalry Regiment 3, and in 1941 as an area commander in the Pirkka-Heim Civil Guard District. War returned in the summer of 1941. Posi was appointed commander of the 11th Company of Infantry Regiment 27. The regiment belonged to the 18th Division commanded by Aro Pajari. During the opening phase of the Continuation War, the division took part in the Finnish offensive on the Karelian Isthmus. Posi's company repeatedly found itself at the spearhead of the advance. The fighting began in the direction of Rautjärvi and continued through Lankila, Ilikunu, Kirvu, Antreja, and toward the Vuoksi River. It was during these battles that Posi demonstrated the qualities that led Aro Pajari to submit a new recommendation for the Mannerheim Cross. According to Pajari's justification, Posi continuously served as a frontline company commander while the 3rd Battalion of Infantry Regiment 27 broke through fortified Soviet positions. During one attack, strong enemy bunkers blocked the company's advance. Posi did not remain behind his men to direct the assault. He personally captured the first 2 bunkers and demonstrated to his soldiers how the positions could be destroyed. The advance then continued. At Ilikunu, Posi's company participated in encircling enemy troops. At Kirvu, he led his men in capturing the southern part of the area. At Vekapea, Soviet forces were again surrounded. Then came Antreja. During the fighting for Antreja Station Village, the command situation in Posi's company became increasingly difficult. 3 platoon commanders were wounded. The company's offensive power could easily have collapsed. Posi continued to lead the attack personally from the front. By his own example, he drove his men forward, and the station village was captured. Finnish troops then reached the Vuoksi River. During the night of August 17 to 18, 1941, Posi led his company in the first line across the Vuoksi at Hopeasalmi. Each of these events formed part of the record that Aro Pahari included in the recommendation. Posi's decoration was therefore not based on one isolated moment. It was based on a series of offensive battles in which he repeatedly led his company from the very front. On August 29, 1941, Commander-in-Chief Mannerheim approved the appointment. Lieutenant Juho Posi became a Knight of the Mannerheim Cross, second class. His Knight number was 7. The official citation emphasized that, while Finnish troops were breaking through fortified enemy positions, Posi had personally captured the first 2 strong bunkers while serving as a frontline company commander. It also stated that throughout the continuing offensive, he had demonstrated personal courage, resourcefulness, and rapid action. Only 3 weeks later, on September 19, 1941, Posi was promoted to captain. His war, however, did not end with the award. He continued serving as a company commander in Infantry Regiment 27. On December 25, 1941, Posi was wounded at Alexandrovka. He later returned to duty. On July 27, 1943, he was wounded again, this time at the Sormenkerki strongpoint on the Rajajoki River. Including the wound he had received at Kola on the final day of the Winter War, this was his 3rd wartime wound. Posi remained with Infantry Regiment 27 until 1944. His continuation war service included not only Rautjärvi and Antrea, but also Salopakola, Pampala, Kaljala-Valkeasaari, and Rajajoki. By the summer of 1944, the direction of the war had completely changed. In 1941, Finnish forces had advanced eastward. 3 years later, the Soviet major offensive forced the Finnish army to retreat on the Karelian Isthmus. Posi's long frontline service ended during 1944. But the end of the war did not bring an immediate return to normal civilian life. After the armistice, the Allied Control Commission demanded the detention of a number of Finnish military and political figures. Posi was included on the so-called List 1. He was detained at the demand of the Control Commission during the post-war years and was later released. According to the Knights of the Mannerheim Cross Foundation's biographical record, the period of detention extended from 1944 until 1947. Posi then continued for a short time in military service. From 1945 until 1948, he served as an adjutant at the Tampere Military District Headquarters. On January 15, 1948, he left active service. After his military career, he settled in Maninka. From 1948 until 1958, Posi worked as a farmer on his own farm. He also participated in veterans and reserve officer organizations. Among other associations, he belonged to the Tolvajärvi Aitojoki Veterans Organization, the Maninka Reserve Officers Club, and the local branch of the Disabled War Veterans Association. Juho Posi died in Maninka on December 14, 1958. He was 60 years old. He was buried in the War Heroes section of the Maninka Parish Cemetery. One feature appears repeatedly throughout Posi's story. He led from the front. At Tolvajärvi and Kola during the Winter War. On the Karelian Isthmus during the offensive phase of the Continuation War. Against bunkers at Kuisma, at Ilikunu, at Kirvu, at Antrea, and finally across the Vuoksi at Hopeasalmi. He was wounded 3 times during the wars, but his Mannerheim Cross was not awarded because he survived those wounds. It was awarded because of the way he led attacks. When his company encountered strong enemy bunkers, Posi did not order his men to go first. He personally captured the first 2. On August 29, 1941, that action, together with his other combat achievements, was enough to receive Mannerheim's approval. Lieutenant Juho Posi, Knight of the Mannerheim Cross No. 7. Knight of the Mannerheim Cross No. 8. Valde-Mattia Sorsa. His story is one of the shortest in the entire series, not because his military career was insignificant, but because it ended when he was only 21 years old. Valde Sorsa was born in Kontiolahti on December 29, 1920. He came from a farming background and was not a professional soldier. When the Continuation War began in the summer of 1941, Sorsa served in the 7th Company of the 2nd Battalion, Infantry Regiment 7. The regiment would soon become one of the best-known Finnish infantry regiments of the Continuation War. It later became known as the Regiment of Tirje. That name came from the battle in which Valde Sorsa first distinguished himself in combat. The Battle of Tirje was fought between July 31st and August 4th, 1941. Infantry Regiment 7 belonged to the Finnish 2nd Division. Its mission was to break the Soviet defensive positions in the Tirje area and open the route toward the western shore of Lake Ladoga. The terrain was difficult. Soviet forces had constructed defensive positions, machine gun nests, and strong points across the area through which the Finns had to advance. The 7th Company of the regiment's 2nd Battalion attacked in the direction of Kukoledonmaki. Valde Sorsa commanded the 4th Squad of the company's 1st Platoon. Sorsa was still a very young soldier, but his superiors quickly began to notice his performance. During the Battle of Tirje, Finnish attacks were stopped at several points by heavy Soviet fire. Sorsa's squad participated in the attempt to penetrate the Soviet defensive line around Kukoledonmaki. According to the original battle report of Infantry Regiment 7, the commander of the 7th Company, 2nd Lieutenant Erkki Tikkanen, his command group, and the squad led by Valde Sorsa succeeded in entering the enemy positions. The Finnish force involved was small, but the breakthrough it achieved had a major effect on the course of the battle. Captain Arvo Ahola, commander of the 2nd Battalion, immediately sent additional troops through the opening. Other Finnish elements followed the 7th Company into the Soviet defensive system. The first enemy defensive line began to collapse. This allowed Finnish forces to advance onto Kukoledonmaki and farther into the Tirje area. Accounts preserved in the traditions of Sorsa's own regiment provide further information about his conduct. According to these accounts, Sorsa repeatedly attacked at the head of his squad and personally engaged enemy firing positions when intense fire prevented the rest of the group from moving forward. At Tirje, Sorsa and his men helped create an opening through which first the 7th Company and later larger elements of the 2nd Battalion were able to advance. The Battle of Tirje ended in a Finnish victory. Infantry Regiment 7 captured the area and continued its advance. The battle became so important to the regiment's identity that JR-7 was thereafter known as the Regiment of Tirje. The war did not stop at Tirje. On August 6th and 7th, Infantry Regiment 7 continued its advance and captured Ihala. On August 8th, Finnish troops captured Ladanpoja. The regiment then continued toward the shore of Lake Ladoga. Between August 14th and 19th, JR-7 advanced from the area between Ladanpoja and Paikjärvi toward Pelkiniemi. During this phase, Valde Sorsa was again involved in an exceptional combat action. On August 19, 1941, Sorsa and his squad fought on the peninsula between Jakonlahti and Pilkinsaari. A later published regimental history gives unusually precise figures for this action. It states that Sorsa's squad killed 50 enemy soldiers and captured 33 prisoners. Sorsa himself was credited with 30 of the enemy dead. These figures come from published regimental historical material and should therefore be understood as the combat figures recorded by that source. What is clear is that Sorsa's performance during the operations following Tirje strengthened his reputation as an exceptionally effective squad leader. Only a few weeks after the beginning of the major Finnish offensive, his record resulted in Finland's highest wartime military distinction. On September 1, 1941, Valde Matthias Sorsa was appointed a Knight of the Mannerheim Cross, 2nd class. His knight number was 8. At the time of the appointment, he held the rank of corporal. The official citation was brief but revealing. Sorsa was decorated for exceptional bravery and for energetic action as the leader of a combat patrol whose conduct had repeatedly assisted the offensive operations of his formation in central Karelia. This makes Sorsa's story very different from those of many of the first knights. He did not receive the cross for commanding a major military formation. He did not plan operations in a headquarters. His influence was created directly at the front of an infantry attack. A squad was one of the smallest fighting elements in an infantry regiment. But in the right place, the successful action of one squad could open the way for a platoon. A platoon could help a company advance. And a company breakthrough could alter the course of an entire battalion's battle. At Tyria, this is essentially what happened. The battle report, written by Infantry Regiment 7 1 year later, described the penetration of a small Finnish force into the Soviet positions as having a decisive influence on the general course of the fighting. Valde Sorsa's squad formed part of that force. After receiving the Mannerheim Cross, Sorsa continued to serve with the same regiment. JR-7 continued its advance on the Karelian Isthmus during 1941. In late August, the regiment moved from the Ladoga region to the area south of the Vuoksi River. On August 28th, it captured Pilainen. On August 30th, JR-7 captured Vuotta, Siranmäki, and Kekrola. On August 31, the regiment reached the old frontier established by the Treaty of Tartu. On September 3rd, JR-7 crossed the Rajajoki River and captured Termala, Kaljala, and Lampijärvi. On September 4th, the regiment reached the western edge of the open terrain at Ota. The rapid offensive of 1941 did not continue indefinitely. The front gradually stabilized. A period of positional warfare followed. Valde Sorsa remained in the 7th Company of Infantry Regiment 7 as a squad leader. He was later promoted to Lance Sergeant. The character of the war was now entirely different from the battles at Tirje or the advance toward Lake Ladoga. Instead of advancing several kilometers in a day, soldiers lived in trenches, constructed and repaired defensive positions, guarded the front, and carried out patrols. Yet positional warfare was never safe. Artillery, mines, patrol actions, and snipers remained constant dangers. By June 1942, Sorsa was serving in the Ota sector northwest of Lake Ladoga. On June 15, 1942, he had just returned to his unit from leave. Sorsa and the men of his squad were camouflaging the forward edge of their trench. An enemy sniper fired. The bullet struck Sorsa. He was seriously wounded. Sorsa was evacuated to a field hospital. According to Finnish veterans' records, he died during surgery later that same day. Valde-Matias Sorsa was only 21 years old. His war had lasted less than a year. Only slightly more than 9 months had passed since he had received the Mannerheim Cross. Sorsa was buried in his home municipality of Kontiolahti. His grave is located in the Kontiolahti War Cemetery. The memory of Valde Sorsa has remained especially strong in Kontiolahti and in the traditions of the regiment of Tirja. Kontiolahti produced 3 knights of the Mannerheim Cross. Sorsa was the first. The other 2 were Veikko Saarelainen, Knight number 37, and Lauri Koko, Knight number 84. On December 6, 2010, a memorial honoring the 3 knights was unveiled in the Veterans Park beside the Kontiolahti War Cemetery. Sorsa's age makes his story particularly remarkable. When he was appointed a Knight of the Mannerheim Cross in September 1941, he was only 20 years old. When he died the following summer, he was 21. His entire known combat career therefore fits into an extraordinarily short period. Yet that short period included the Battle of Tirje, the advance toward Lake Ladoga, combat performance that his commanders considered exceptional, and the Mannerheim Cross. The official justification for his appointment did not refer to decades of military service. He had none. It referred to bravery, energetic action, and to the fact that the actions of one combat patrol leader had repeatedly assisted the offensive of an entire military formation. That is an appropriate summary of Valde Sorsa's military career. At Tirja, a small breakthrough helped open the route for a much larger force. A few weeks later, the young corporal's name had been entered into the list of the Knights of the Mannerheim Cross. Less than a year later, his war ended in the trenches at Ota Valde-Matias Sorsa. squad leader of the regiment of Tirya, killed at the age of 21. Knight of the Mannerheim Cross number 8. Knight of the Mannerheim Cross number 9, Eero. Olavi Kivela differed from many of the first knights because he was not a professional officer of Finland's standing army. He was a reserve officer who worked in business and social administration in civilian life. During the war, he became a company commander, later a battalion commander, and eventually a major. In September 1941, he became the first reserve officer, appointed a Knight of the Mannerheim Cross. Eero Olavi Kivela was born in Tampere on June 18, 1908. He attended Tampere Lyceum and graduated from Tampere Commercial College in Eindhoven. Kivela completed his military service in the artillery during 1929 and 1930 and attended Reserve Officer School in 1930. He was promoted to Reserve Second Lieutenant on December 1, 1930, and Reserve Lieutenant on May 16, 1938. Kivela was also active in Finland's Civil Guard and worked as an instructor with the Perkala Civil Guard from 1930 until 1934. In civilian life, he worked for Suomen Gummitehdas Nokia and, from 1936, G.A. Serlachius Oyen Menta. On November 30, 1939, the Soviet Union invaded Finland. The Winter War began. Kivela was appointed a company commander in Infantry Regiment 16. He fought in the areas of Tolvajärvi, Ristisalmi, and Aitojoki. The Battle of Tolvajärvi in December 1939 became one of Finland's first significant victories of the Winter War. On December 14, 1939, Kivela was wounded at Ristisalmi. His performance nevertheless impressed his superiors. After the war, Colonel Aro Pajari proposed Kivela for the Mannerheim Cross for his Winter War achievements. The proposal did not lead to an appointment because consideration of Winter War recommendations was interrupted when the Continuation War began. The Winter War ended on March 13, 1940. On July 31, 1940, Kivela was promoted to reserve captain. During the interim peace, he served as an area commander in the Pirkanmaa Civil Guard District. In the summer of 1941, war against the Soviet Union began again. Kivela was appointed commander of the 10th Company of Infantry Regiment 27. The regiment belonged to the 18th Division, commanded by Aro Pajari. During the Finnish offensive of 1941, Kivela's company fought in areas including Rautjärvi, Kuisma, Lankila, Ilikunu, Kirvu, Antrea, and Hopea Salmi. It was during these battles that he performed the actions that led to his Mannerheim Cross. Near Finland's former frontier, Finnish forces encountered strongly fortified Soviet positions. Kivela commanded his company from the front line during the breakthrough in the Hallilanmäki and Kuisma sector. The official citation emphasized his personal bravery during this fighting. Another important action took place at Lankila. Soviet forces attempted to break through the Finnish positions. Kivela's men launched a counterattack and forced the enemy back. According to the official citation, 9 enemy tanks were destroyed during the fighting. On September 8, 1941, Commander-in-Chief Mannerheim appointed Captain Eero Olavi Kivela a Knight of the Mannerheim Cross, 2nd class. His knight number was 9. Kivela also became the first reserve officer among the Knights of the Mannerheim Cross. His war continued. In addition to Infantry Regiment 27, he also served in Infantry Regiment 6. On March 26, 1943, Kivela was promoted to major. He later served as a training officer, battalion commander in Infantry Regiment 27, and Chief of Staff of Infantry Regiment 48. In 1944, he also commanded a battalion in Infantry Regiment 47. One of his most interesting assignments involved Infantry Regiment 200 JR 200, was a Finnish regiment composed mainly of Estonian volunteers. These men became known as the Finnish Boys, or Suomenpojat. During 1944, Kivela served in the regiment both as a battalion commander and as chief of staff. He also participated in the Finnish capture of Suursaari in the spring of 1942. During 1944, he additionally commanded separate Battalion 25. In the autumn of 1944, Finland's war against the Soviet Union ended. Kivela was released from military service at his own request on December 2, 1944, but the war continued to influence his life. During the final stages of the conflict, Finnish military authorities had prepared for the possibility of a Soviet occupation. Weapons and military equipment had been secretly dispersed into caches across Finland. This later became known as the weapons cache case. Kivela was one of the important figures involved in the operation in central Finland and northern Hemi. After the war, he was arrested. Kivela received a 14-month prison sentence in the weapons cache case. He spent 5 months in detention. Then something unusual happened. Kivela had been a National Coalition Party candidate in the 1945 parliamentary election. He had not initially been elected, but a parliamentary seat later became vacant. While being held by the Finnish state police, Kivela entered parliament from the reserve list. He was released on October 4, 1945. Because of his new parliamentary duties, Kivela began serving as a member of parliament on October 10, 1945, and remained in parliament until 1947. In civilian life, Kivela built a long career with Oy Finlayson Forssa, AB. He worked as the company's social director until 1973. Kivela also remained active in public affairs. He served on the Tampere City Council from 1951 until 1972 and held several other municipal positions. He was a presidential elector in 1950, 1956, and 1962. In 1954, Kivela was one of the signatories of the founding Charter of the Foundation of the Knights of the Mannerheim Cross. He served on its council until 1992 and was vice chairman from 1984 until 1988. On June 4, 1967, he was promoted to lieutenant colonel in the reserve. Eero Olavi. Kivela died in Tampere on July 19, 1992. He was 84 years old. He was buried in Aitolahti. Kivela's life combined war and civilian society in an unusual way. During the Winter War, he commanded a company in the Tolvajärvi sector and was wounded at Ristisalmi. During the Continuation War, he led his men in the offensive on the Karelian Isthmus, at Halilanmäki and Kuismaa. He commanded from the front during the breakthrough of strong Soviet positions. At Lankila, his counterattack stopped the enemy and 9 tanks were destroyed during the fighting. On September 8, 1941, these actions resulted in the Mannerheim Cross. Later, he commanded battalions and served with the Estonian Volunteers of Infantry Regiment 200. After the war, he was imprisoned in connection with the weapons cache case. From prison, his path led to the Finnish Parliament, Captain Eero Olavi Kivela, the first reserve officer among the Knights of the Mannerheim Cross. Knight of the Mannerheim Cross, number 9. Knight of the Mannerheim Cross, number 10. Olli Reems. The final knight in our first episode was a man whose life combined 2 completely different worlds. Before the war, he represented Finland among some of the world's best cross-country skiers. During the war, many of the same qualities, endurance, skiing ability, and the capacity to operate in the harsh conditions of the North, became military strengths. Olli Reems was born in Iisalmi on September 8, 1909. His parents were blacksmith Pekka Reemes and Maria Malm. Reemes attended elementary school and joined the Vierumäe Civil Guard in 1926. His compulsory military service began in the North Savo Regiment in 1929. Even in peacetime, Reemes demonstrated exceptional physical ability. In 1930, he became Finnish Army champion in the 17-kilometer cross-country skiing event. Skiing soon became much more than military sport. Reemes rose into the ranks of Finland's internationally competitive cross-country skiers. The 1934 Nordic World Ski Championships were held in Sollefteå, Sweden. Reemes competed in both the 18 and 50-kilometer races. In the 50-kilometer race, he won a World Championship bronze medal. He finished 15th over 18 kilometers. 2 years later, Remes traveled to Garmisch-Partenkirchen in Germany for the 1936 Winter Olympics. He was a member of Finland's military patrol team. Military patrol was held as a demonstration event and was a predecessor of modern biathlon. The Finnish team finished second. Remes also represented Finland at the 1939 World Ski Championships in Zakopane, Poland. As Europe moved toward war, he was therefore already an internationally successful athlete. But Remes also possessed a substantial military background. After completing his compulsory service, he worked as a storekeeper and instructor with the North Savo Regiment from 1931 until 1934. In 1935, he entered the Finnish Border Guard. He served as an instructor in the Lapland Border Guard until the beginning of the Winter War. Service in the far north was an environment in which Remes's skiing ability, physical condition, and familiarity with wilderness movement were useful even during peacetime. On November 30th, 1939, the Soviet Union invaded Finland. The Winter War began. Remes was appointed leader of a guerrilla detachment in Separate Battalion 17. His war was fought in the Salla sector of northern Finland. The region differed greatly from the more densely developed battlefields of the Karelian Isthmus. Distances were long. Roads were scarce. The winter was severe. Forests and wilderness dominated the landscape. Under these conditions, Finnish patrols and guerrilla detachments could use skiing skills, knowledge of the terrain, and mobility to their advantage. During the Winter War, Remes fought in areas including Kelsinkäinen, Aatsinki, Kuolajärvi, Salla, Onkamo, Sokka, Joutsijärvi, Mäntyvaara, Valtanen, and Päävaara. In the Salla sector, Soviet forces attempted to advance deeper into Finland. The Finnish defenders ultimately stopped their progress. Remes was also rapidly given greater responsibility and promoted. On January 15, 1940, he became a senior sergeant. On February 18th, he was promoted to warrant officer. On April 1st, 1940, shortly after the end of the Winter War, he was promoted to second lieutenant. His performance had impressed his superiors. Colonel Oiva Vilamo proposed Remes for the Mannerheim Cross on the basis of his achievements during the Winter War. However, the processing of the Winter War recommendations remained unfinished when the Continuation War began. Remes would later receive another opportunity to earn the cross. During the interim peace, he continued serving with the border troops. On May 10, 1941, Remes was promoted to lieutenant. War returned that summer. At the beginning of the Continuation War, Remes first served as a patrol leader in the 46th Border Company and later transferred to Infantry Regiment 54 as a platoon commander. He soon received command of a company. Once again, his battlefield was in the north. Finnish and German forces attacked from the Salla and Kuusamo regions toward Soviet territory. Remes participated in fighting around Kuopsitunturi, Tutijärvi, Kutsa, Vuorikila, Makiakunvaara, Alakurti, and Tuntsa. The opening months of the Continuation War demonstrated very clearly what kind of commander he was. On July 3, 1941, Remes was wounded at Kutsa. A rifle bullet passed through his arm. According to the official citation for his Mannerheim Cross, Remes was encouraging his men forward by personal example when he was hit. Despite the wound, he completed his mission. He then had to recover from the injury. But Remes returned to the front while still recuperating. More heavy fighting followed. According to the official citation, his company then resisted the attacks of an enemy many times stronger for several days. Remes commanded his men while the pressure continued day after day. On August 23, 1941, he was wounded again at Vuorikila. Only 6 days later, on August 29th, Remes was injured again by Soviet artillery fire at Serkalampi, near Alakurti. He was urged to go to hospital. Remes refused. A general attack was expected to begin soon. When the attack came, Remes was again with his men. This time, enemy barbed wire obstacles blocked the Finnish advance. According to the official award citation, Remes was the first to reach the wire. Under enemy fire, he cut through the obstacle with a shovel. During the action, fragments from a hand grenade caused minor wounds to his face and hands. Remes went to have his wounds dressed. Then he returned. He continued commanding his company. According to the citation, he once again advanced among the foremost men, participated in capturing enemy dugouts, and took numerous prisoners with his troops. At this point, the continuation war had lasted only a few months. Rems had already been wounded several times and repeatedly returned to command his men. On September 12, 1941, Commander-in-Chief Mannerheim made his decision. Lieutenant Olli Remes was appointed a Knight of the Mannerheim Cross, second class. His knight number was 10. The official citation emphasized his exceptional personal bravery and determination. Remes did not receive the Mannerheim Cross for a single brief act. The citation described an entire sequence of events: being wounded during an attack, completing his mission despite the wound, returning to the front before fully recovering, holding off the attacks of a vastly superior enemy for several days, being injured again, refusing hospitalization, cutting enemy barbed wire under fire, being wounded yet again, and returning once more to command his company. Personal example was therefore central to the justification for Remes's Mannerheim Cross. He commanded his troops from positions where the same dangers facing his soldiers also threatened him. The war continued after his appointment. Rems served as a company commander in Infantry Regiment 54 during 1941 and 1942. Later in 1942, he transferred to the 12th Brigade as a company commander. The rapid offensive phase on the Northern Front had ended, and the war settled into positional fighting. Rems served in areas including Kilistunturi, Alavilmajoki, and Krivi. On November 8, 1942, he was wounded once again at Krivi. Yet once again, he returned to duty. At the end of December 1942, his military career received one final recognition. On December 29, 1942, Olli Remes was promoted to captain. He was 33 years old. 2 days later came New Year's Eve. On December 31, 1942, Remes was at Krivi. The long series of occasions on which he had survived finally ended there. An enemy sniper's bullet struck him fatally. Olli Remes was killed only 2 days after his promotion to captain. He was buried in the war cemetery at Vierme. He left behind his wife Ina and their 2 children, Olli and Ularita, born in 1938 and 1940. Olli Remes lived a short life, but it contained 2 very different careers. Before the war, Finns knew him as a skier. In 1934, he had won a World Championship bronze medal over 50 kilometers. In 1936, he had been part of the Finnish military patrol team that finished second at Garmisch-Partenkirchen. When war came, the skier became a patrol leader and company commander. During the Winter War, he fought in the wilderness of the Sala sector. During the Continuation War, he led his men through offensive battles in the north. He was wounded repeatedly, and repeatedly returned. The official citation for his Mannerheim Cross leaves little doubt about why he was decorated: personal bravery, determination, and leadership by example. On September 12, 1941, his name was added to the list of the Knights of the Mannerheim Cross. Olli Remes, World Championship medalist, Border Guard soldier, company commander, captain, killed at Krivi on December 31, 1942, Knight of the Mannerheim Cross, number 10. These were the Knights of the Mannerheim Cross. Numbers 1 through 10, 10 very different men, generals, company commanders, border guards, ordinary soldiers, and a fighter pilot. They fought on different fronts and performed very different roles. Ruben Lagis commanded mobile forces and became the first knight of the Mannerheim Cross. Paavo Talvila's name became especially associated with the Battle of Tolvajärvi-Erkki. Rapana became known for his skill in wilderness and forest warfare. Vilho Rato demonstrated that the Mannerheim Cross was not a decoration reserved only for high-ranking officers. Oiva Tuominen fought for Finland in the air. Juho Posi and Eero Kivela led their men directly from the front during offensive battles. Valdesorsa's military career was short, but his actions made him one of the youngest men among the first. Knights Aliremes exchanged the life of an international skier for the battlefields of the Northern Front and led his men by personal example. But the stories of these 10 men were only the beginning. A total of 191 men were appointed, Knights of the Mannerheim Cross behind. Every number is a different story. Stories of pilots, tank soldiers, long-range patrolmen, infantrymen, and commanders. Some survived the war and lived for decades in peace. Others never returned home. In this series, we will continue in the numerical order of the knights and tell their stories one by one. In the next episode, we continue with Knights of the Mannerheim Cross numbers 11 through 20 new men. New battles, and 10 new stories from Finnish military history. If you want to see this series continue all the way to the final night, number 191, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you do not miss the next episode. And tell us in the comments which story from these first 10 knights stayed with you the most. This was the first chapter in the story of the Knights of the Mannerheim Cross, but the story has only just begun. Next, Knights of the Mannerheim Cross numbers 11 through 20. Thank you for watching.